Hello and welcome to India's World. Vietnamese President Tran Dai Quang was in India on a three-day visit, which saw the signing of 3 MOUs on nuclear cooperation, agriculture and trade. Each of these are set to strengthen ties between both the countries in light of India's Act East policy. President Quang also backed India's permanent membership to UN Security Council. In today's episode, we'll take a look at the latest developments and how it will boost India and Vietnam's focus on creating an extended neighborhood in the Asia-Pacific region. In studio with me, we've got former Ambassador Mr. Rajiv Bhatia, Distinguished Fellow at Gateway House, Pant, Head of Strategic Studies at ORF, and Brigadier Vinod Anand, Senior Fellow at VIF. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on the show. If I could start with you, Ambassador, in the matter of just 3 months, the 2 senior-most leaders of Vietnam visiting India. Of course, the Prime Minister was here in his capacity as a guest at the Republic Day Parade, and now we've got the President who visited us just till yesterday. What are the highlights, according to you, at least in this latest visit?
I think the highlights could be described as the continuation and consolidation of the relationship. And this was nothing very unclear at all. In fact, it was very clear and evident from the joint statement where both the countries expressed immense satisfaction over the excellent state of comprehensive strategic partnership. So this is the main thrust. Another point I think one would like to highlight is that the situation in Southeast Asia has been changing rapidly, and therefore 2 countries, India and Vietnam, which are very close partners, need to consult each other at the highest political levels from time to time.
Yes.
So in essence, I would say that it was a positive visit. It has shown that there are many areas in which the 2 countries and the 2 governments would like to work. And they, I am sure, have worked out a kind of a very set action plan for taking the relationship forward.
All right. Harsh, this year, in fact, it marks about 45 years of India-Vietnam bilateral relations, diplomatic relations. So, keeping that in mind, how have you seen the last decade or so developing as far as both of these nations are concerned?
I think it has been a very remarkable change in trajectory of the relationship in the last decade. Partly, I think we have looked at the regional politics evolving in similar manner. I think our concerns are quite similar, our apprehensions are quite similar, our ambitions are quite similar in the sense of what sort of a balance of power we want in the region. So that has meant a certain convergence in the way we have interacted with each other, and interactions at the very highest levels make it possible to ascertain what your priorities are, and I think that's what these last 2 visits have done. But in the last decade, what we have also seen is a remarkable shift in what is happening in the larger region. So therefore, from a regional perspective, to understand each other and to look at 2 major powers, for example, America and China, and how they are reassessing the region, I think from that point of view, both Vietnam and India tend to be on the same side of the equation, looking at the region in very similar terms, and therefore assessing and prioritizing their relationship in a very similar terms. So we have seen, for example, a relationship that has evolved primarily as a legacy issue of the Cold War to one which is very forward-looking, very project-oriented, and as you pointed out, this visit led to specific agreements on nuclear cooperation, on trade and agriculture, which can only happen if there is a larger degree of satisfaction with the way the relationship has been progressing. So we have seen some very positive developments of the last decade.
Okay. Brigadier Anand, the South China Sea issue, Vietnam and other ASEAN nations, of course, they have serious concerns with that, with China. So how much of an India support actually count?
If you look at some of the statements which the Indian leaders have been making for last several years, including what happened in the PCA award in July 16. So India has been in fact consistently supporting the freedom of navigation, the unimpeded flow of commerce, and even unimpeded overflights over South China Sea, which is in fact a support for the it supports Vietnam's position or some of these South China Sea countries' positions on what's happening there. So adhering to the international norms and adhering to UNCLOS.
Yes.
So these are some of the points which India has been consistently supporting. So that's, I suppose, the South China Sea. And it also supports the Asian centrality in South China Sea, that they should be able to evolve along with China a code of conduct, and it should be a binding code of conduct. And I think some advance has been made in that direction, but it's not very clear whether China would actually go in for a binding code of conduct in South China Sea.
Vietnam also has called on India to play a more proactive role, in Southeast Asia. How do we see that happening?
Yes, I think first of all, Vietnamese have been very consistent in saying that they support India's Act East policy. And they very much appreciate it because they know that India is a major player in the East Asian region, and it can do a lot of balancing as far as the other major powers are concerned. Flowing from that, very clearly, India is expected not just by Vietnam, but by other Southeast Asian countries to play a more active, a stronger role in the region. Now, what exactly do they mean by this? I think we can offer two explanations, one on the strategic side and the other on the economic side. I think on the politico-strategic side, there is an expectation that India would take the concept of Indo-Pacific seriously. I think India is already taking that concept seriously, and it was on this concept there was complete convergence and agreement between the visiting Vietnamese president and the Indian leadership. On the economic side, I think we have to be realistic and candid to say that both the governments are somewhat discontented that the trends are not as positive as they would like it to be. The bilateral trade is still rather low and limited. They have given to themselves the target of $15 billion by 2020. The investment is growing, but still is not of very big size, although the number of Indian companies and projects working in Vietnam has been steadily on the increase. So what this time the two governments have done is to send a very clear call to the ministries, agencies, India Inc., Vietnam Inc., that here are about a dozen specific sectors in which you should focus on the promotional measures.
Okay.
And therefore, we hope that both on the strategic and economic side, there would be more tangible progress in the coming months.
Absolutely. And Harsh, trade is important because Vietnam is standing up to China, but as far as trade with China is concerned, it is still the biggest trading partner. And in that sense, how much of a contribution of India or how much of a push from India could actually help Vietnam also strategically place itself when it comes to China and issues like South China Sea?
Absolutely. I think Vietnam has been one of the most consistent voices within ASEAN asking for India's greater role in the region. And what we are now looking at is perhaps a possibility where many of these countries in the ASEAN, including Vietnam, want a greater strategic presence from India. But the problem that India faces is exactly the economic dimension of our relationship remains very weak compared to what China provides to the region, and therefore our ability to have a larger strategic dimension to the relationship becomes limited. Economics and strategic dimensions more often than not go together, and especially in a region which has relied on economic growth to project itself to the world as a center of gravity of the world. So I think in that sense, ASEAN and including Vietnam's concerns from India have been that that India's ability to be an economic security provider has been relatively limited. India has been trying to emerge as a strategic security provider, which has been more, I think we have been better at it. So I think the challenge going forward is how do you improve connectivity to the region, how do you enhance your trade ties with the region so that the larger strategic dimension becomes more potent. And I think as Ambassador Bhatia was pointing out, now the attempt is to frame it in accordance with the specific projects, specific ideas about trade and what can be done about trade. We have to be realistic that in the short time it's not possible to have a dramatic turnaround. But I think the emphasis is that if you want to build a strategic partnership, then the foundation of economic ties, trade ties have to be substantive, and therefore I think much effort should go towards building that relationship.
Anand, this time around we also saw a statement with a lot of focus on maritime security, and I keep coming back to that because that was where the emphasis was this time around, when the president was here. So give us a sense of, what more are we going to be seeing on that front, as far as security concerns and maritime security specifically is concerned.
Basically shared common security perceptions and strategic convergence on what's happening in Indo-Pacific. That propel us both to have a good defense and security cooperation. So maritime security cooperation actually was talked about in the ASEAN-India this commemorative summit. And here Vietnam and India, they have been cooperating in many ways. For instance, the Milan exercises. Vietnam is one of the key partners in the Milan exercises. And there are many other Southeast Asian countries taking part in these exercises. Leaving that aside, the Indian and Vietnam navies, they have been providing mutual support. The Vietnamese ships have been visiting India, and Indian ships also visit the Vietnamese ports like Nha Trang. And we've been providing also training to their submarine crews because they have Kilo class submarines which are of Russian origin. And there is also maintenance support for a lot of other Russian origin equipment. And maritime security has a wider implication. Not only we have the bilateral cooperation going on, we also have under the rubric of ADDM plus cooperation going on not only with Vietnam but other navies. And this maritime security cooperation is therefore is a significant portion of our strategic convergence and cooperation.
That's right. And also as far as Vietnam's strategic positioning is concerned, and we're talking about, Indian ships, of course, going towards Vietnam. But you also have today's news is that the US's nuclear-powered aircraft carrier Carl Vinson, in fact, is going to be anchoring on the port city of Da Nang. That in itself is a historic occasion, but it's also demonstrating the growing ties, military ties, the US and Vietnam. And Vietnam is looking at India, Japan and the US, countries like this, to, of course, establish itself a little more strongly in that particular region, isn't it?
Yes, I think we can be quite candid at this discussion here today. During the chairmanship of ASEAN, which was with the Philippines until recently, an atmosphere was created which was rather supportive and sympathetic of China. And as a result, they were able to reach some agreement about the framework agreement on the code of conduct, which really made other countries, including Vietnam, rather uncomfortable. Now the situation is changed. Singapore is the chair. It is going to be probably much more assertive and objective, and therefore Vietnam probably feels quite comfortable that the forthcoming negotiations for the code of conduct would be run probably in a better atmosphere. In the joint statement signed yesterday between India and Vietnam, the two parties have called for effective and substantive code of conduct. So this is a positive sign from the Indian side. I can simply say, and this is my last point on this issue, when the discussion about Quad began, the quadrilateral relationship involving India, US, Japan and Australia, some of us had raised the question, what is the role of ASEAN in this? Now, all 10 countries of ASEAN may not be interested in this, but there are a few countries which are deeply interested in Quad, and the relationship between Quad and ASEAN or individual member states of ASEAN, Vietnam leads the pack.
Okay.
So I have no doubt that in this dialogue in Delhi, a very special focus must have been given to the subject.
Okay. Harsh, any other aspect that perhaps we've not been able to tap, India has not been able to tap, but they're looking forward to as far as Vietnam relations are concerned, whether it be on trade, whether it be, of course, security-wise is something which is, of course, important that we're discussing quite widely here. But apart from that, on any other, developmental, infrastructural projects, is that something that India is keen to focus on as well?
I think one of the interesting things that at least I have come across is that there is a lot of interest in India beyond just the strategic circles in Vietnam, I think. And that is perhaps a good thing from our perspective, where ordinary Vietnamese are looking at India as a country with great potential and therefore with the possibility of greater engagement. Now, one of the things that I was told was that the Communist Party in Vietnam is in their the organization that runs their school, for example, for their cadres, has only the think tank that has only one country specific module, and that is on India.
Okay.
So I think the focus therefore on India is going to be very, very substantive in Vietnam, partly because I think the issues that have been raised, that look, the future belongs to, if you want to preserve your sovereignty and integrity in a world which is being shaped rapidly by China's rise, then you need to involve and become part of other countries which are like-minded, and therefore countries like India and other countries in the Quad and beyond also who are looking at the region through a similar lens, their engagement has to expand, and Vietnam therefore is looking at India through a very different lens than it was, in your earlier question was a decade back.
Yes.
And therefore now the possibilities are immense. The question is, I think, are we in a position to tap into that? Are we doing enough to deliver on the ground some of the commitments that we have made, whether in trade, infrastructure or energy? Are we going moving forward? Are we doing that? And energy is one crucial area where much can be done. There is some news reports today about energy, ONGC doing some deals once again with the Vietnamese companies,
which China has raised concerns
objections
about.
In the past they had raised objections because we had pointedly Vietnam had asked India to go into an area which China considers disputed, and India took a very, very convincing and very direct stand that siding with Vietnam on that issue. So I think that was a very powerful message that we are going to be with our friends in Vietnam on this issue, and we take those sides. And I think now going forward, not only in that area but in the more disputed ones, but also largely into energy cooperation will be one area where perhaps there are many potential benefits to be reaped.
Okay, as far as oil and gas exploration goes, Brigadier Anand, India and Vietnam also looking for partners. I understand, to take this forward.
Yeah. Well, yes, of course, they are looking for partners, and I can see some of these partners in maybe Japan or maybe even Russia, but the point is the geopolitics involved may preclude some the third partners from this or the third partner. But then India and Vietnam, I think both can make some attempts at this. But then what I would like to say is that other than what you already discussed, there is the question of cooperation in cybersecurity and space, where India is setting up a space I think center there, but that is under the ASEAN rubric, overall cooperation with ASEAN. But there are many other areas where India and Vietnam need to do something effective, even in the question of providing some of the defense weapon systems or missiles. There are many offers which have been made to Vietnam, and I think they are still perhaps evaluating these offers, and India needs to go through the processes to make effective contribution on these aspects, including helping them establish their own indigenous defense industry.
Okay. The two sides also agreed on building a strong consensus for early adoption of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism. That's a long name, so I'm having to read that out.
Yes.
But what does this imply? What are the implications of this? Do we see something bigger happening on this front?
Well, I think, you know, this has been a very integral and consistent part of projection of India's foreign policy, you know, steady opposition to international terrorism. And there are a number of ways in which we have been pushing this. I think Vietnam is fully with us. There is a complete marriage of minds, and I think therefore probably negotiating that particular paragraph would not have posed any serious problems. With your permission, I would like to highlight two new dimensions which came through, and this relate to the public diplomacy practiced by Vietnam, which is quite a model for the other ASEAN countries. First of all, in Vietnam, there is a serious stress, as Harsh said earlier, on India studies. There are a number of institutions which are focusing on this, but there is hardly anybody doing this in India, as you would have discovered yourself. So yesterday, President, with the help of the relevant Indian parties and stakeholders, launched a new thing, Center for Vietnam Studies in New Delhi. This is quite historic. This is being located here in New Delhi at the Institute of Social Sciences, and this will bring together on a common platform all the Vietnam scholars of India. The second thing was, when the President spoke to the public yesterday, invited public at Teen Murthy Memorial, I was struck by the fact that he not merely delivered a special address, but he also showed readiness to answer questions from young scholars. So there was a very interesting question answer session in which he reiterated the view that apart from the governments, apart from the business communities, there is a role for informed citizenry and strategic community and scholars and universities, the youth in particular, to invest in the future of this relationship. I think this was a very positive sign.
That's actually interesting, and it also shows us at this evolving role of evolving, face of a leader of a country, isn't it, Harsh? Just stepping away, taking it a little broader from just what, of course, Ambassador said. Reaching out to the public is increasingly becoming so important for leaders. To actually establish, what is it that you want to achieve on the government level as well. And it's interesting to see that that is, of course, something that our Prime Minister also indulges in, and that is something that, other leaders are also doing. And that's, of course, a good sign. But, we also understand he came with a very large business delegation this time around. So were we able to actually see something that takes place on that front, or we'll hear about that in a few, months to come?
I think 2 points. One on changing nature of diplomacy. I think this is something that we are encountering it in every day. The way foreign policy is being conducted today, in this day and age, it's not possible to have just a government-to-government dialogue and think that the relationship can move forward. And especially, I think, in a context where we are looking at reinvigorating a relationship, we need new stakeholders. And I think reaching out to them, reaching out to youth and scholars and students is perhaps the best way to provide a long-term sustainability to a relationship.
Absolutely.
So I think Vietnam, I think Ambassador has pointed out, is a great development that we are witnessing. On trade, I think I would say that we need to do much more than what we have done. And I think specific delivery, time-bound delivery of specific agreements would be much more important in sort of assuaging some of the concerns, not only in Vietnam, but in some other ASEAN countries as well, that India often overcommits and underdelivers. I think that if that is a problem, if that is a perception that continues to hang over us, then I think we will be in a bit of a spot in the coming years.
All right, but of course the kind of interaction that we are seeing between the leaders, and not just between the top leaders, but even on the governmental levels, diplomatic levels, I think that in itself is encouraging. Final words from you, Brigadier. What is it that we are going to be seeing in the next 5 years? When they complete 50 years of diplomatic relations, what is it that we'll be talking about that they've been able to achieve in the last 5 years?
No, in fact, last year, like it was mentioned that 45 years of what we have achieved in 45 years. So the relations both in the political, economic and the strategic field, including defense and security, I think they are on the upward trajectory. And I am sure in next 5 years, the both political relationship, which is already, I think, is quite strong, it will be further cemented. And on the economic aspects, I think we have not been very ambitious enough. The target which we set for 2020 of $15 billion, I think is not very ambitious. We should have set maybe a larger target. Therefore, we need to give more leeway to Vietnam for their and reduce some of the tariff barriers and widen the commodities in trade.
All right.
And in the defense and security arena, we must help them in building their own defense industry, as also to give some of the defense systems which they need to maintain a balance in South China Sea.
Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you for giving me just the last chance. I would make very quickly 2 points.
Yes.
One is that in the next 5 years, there is little doubt that the trilateral highway linking India, Myanmar, Thailand would be ready. Not merely that, possibly its extension to Indochina, including Vietnam, would be also a reality. And therefore, you would have for the first time a chance to be able to drive from the Indian soil directly to Vietnam. And the second point is that on the idea of concept, I would like to say that some of the scholars have begun to say that with SAARC stalled and with India defining its immediate neighborhood with the eastward tilt,
Yes.
probably the time has come for BIMSTEC, which is largely a South Asian body with 2 Southeast Asian nations, Myanmar and Thailand. It should consider extending itself to the 3 other Indochina countries, that is Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. Then it can be a powerful body, a very strong lasting link between India and ASEAN.
All right. On that interesting thought, I'll have to wind up the discussion here. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on India's World. We look forward to your feedback. Writing to us at indiasworld.feedback@gmail.com. That's it for me for this week. Thank you.